Hello. I guess we can get started. So welcome to the BFCache and Standards section. So I'm Kohei from the BFCache desktop effort. So we have several goals for this session. So we would like to give some updates since our last BlinkOn. Since our last Android launch, we doubled down on the Standards effort, and we would like to show what we have done since. There are some new areas we've just started, invalidation and testing in particular. So we'll walk you through there. And aside from updates, we also welcome generic feedback on how we are doing. If you feel like we are missing on something, please do let us know, and we'd like to follow up on you. So from here on, I want to pass the button to Akina.
Okay. So just a quick recap on BFCache. So you probably know about BFCache already, so this is going to be very quick. So usually after we navigate away from a page, it will get discarded, the documents and everything related to it. But with BFCache, it will be kept around instead. So later on, if we navigate back to the page, we can reuse the old document and everything that we made for that document, and we don't need to start from scratch. While the document is in BFCache and it should be treated as kind of not there, kind of like invisible. So it should not get new information. It should not get new information about everything. For example, geolocation API, if the page has listened to like geolocation updates before it got navigated away, it shouldn't get any updates while it's in BFCache, even after it gets restored later. And then if there are APIs that might have references to pages in BFCache, for example, service worker might want to query all the clients, it shouldn't notice that the BFCache document is still there, and things like that. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is basically just an illustration of what I said before. So if a page is in BFCache, it shouldn't get geolocation updates, like APIs that APIs should treat it as it's not there, and it should not hinder other pages from doing things like IndexedDB transactions. Next slide, please. Okay, so during our last BlinkOn, we have mentioned our goals for standardization, and 6 months later, we have more concrete goals and plans for standardization. For example, we want to standardize all web-exposed BFCache behavior, whether it's specific to BFCache, like page show event, it has persisted, and unload event won't fire, things like that. And also interaction with other specifications, like I mentioned, service worker, and also make sure they are all well tested with WPTs. And also we want to ensure all future APIs are made with BFCache in mind, because we found that a lot of current APIs, they're kind of hard to make work with BFCache without breaking user expectations. So we don't want that to happen in the future. Other than that, we also identified some need to provide APIs related to BFCache, which includes the Invalidation API that Fergal will talk about later. Next slide, please. And okay, so standardizing BFCache in general, we already kind of talked about this in the last BlinkOn, so this will be quick. So how BFCache is specified in the HTML spec itself is quite subtle, which is why we suspect is why lots of APIs miss adding BFCache support. We found that retrofitting those APIs is hard, like I mentioned, and also user agent implementation varies quite wildly. BFCache itself is not new. It's been in Safari since like 2009 and Firefox since a couple years ago, I guess. So, and not much effort has been done to standardize all the behavior there, and it's all very user agent specific. So yeah, we want to have better standardization, and we also want to have a future where BFCache BFCache is a thing that everyone knows about and everyone thinks about when they design their API. So our concrete steps here are we have proposed to the tag, the W3C tag, to add guidelines. So they have this doc called the design principles guidelines or something. Basically, it's a thing that all API, when people want to make new web APIs, they need to consider them along with the security and privacy questionnaire. And we have proposed additions to the document, and they accepted. They are very they are very happy with our proposal, and we are going to send PRs to them soon. And hopefully that will be considered during tag reviews as well. And also we made explainers so that just generally API engineers can read them and see that, oh, this is how I need to think about BFCache. And we also have filed lots of issues of known differences between implementation and behaviors. And we've written some tests for those issues, and we are going to write more tests. And eventually, we're going to update the specification and resolve the differences between the browsers. And we've also contacted owners of existing APIs just to figure out what's the best way to retrofit your API to work with BFCache and all that. Okay, next slide is Virgil, I think.
Yeah, so one of the biggest reasons why pages don't go into BFCache at the moment in the web in general is because they have cache control no store on them. We see about 15% of pages not going into BFCache as a result of this. And we feel like most pages, even if they don't want to be cached, don't want to be written to disk, they should be okay with persisting in the BFCache temporarily. So when Safari implemented BFCache, they actually made it so that this happened, but they got some complaints because of pages persisting after logout and data persisting after logout and things like that. So we want to try and make it so that sites can invalidate their BFCache pages when they feel like it. And if we provide some kind of API for this, then we could possibly make it so that cache control no store does not apply to BF caching. There's a few different ideas for how we might do that, whether we just have an API that's via the history API, whether we use clear site data, a direct JavaScript API, or tying things to cookies. And then there's also the possibility that, well, maybe we should never do that. Maybe we need a different header that says, I'm kind of like cache control no store, but it's okay to put me in BF cache. And I'd like to get feedback and opinions on all of that. Thanks.
Okay, and then we are also preparing for adding the web platform test for BFCache for interoperability and for supporting our implementation. We are starting adding tests starting from simple event dispatching and forecast and so on, and which are mostly corresponding to the list of issues on the standard discussions. And there are a couple of things new here in implementing those tests. One of them, the first one is there are lots of differences in BFCache eligibility between browsers like Android or those and other factors that is which this kind of differences will be allowed within the spec. So we are going to assert the precondition failed instead of simple failure if the BFCache eligibility is different from the test expectation to allow the browser vendors to consider those kind of precondition failed things just due to the differences in BFCache eligibility. And the second one is the ergonomics around the top-level navigation, because at least in Chromium implementation, the BFCache is only available for documents that are navigated on top level at top level. But the existing web platform tests have not so much support for the top-level navigation test. And there are multiple documents isolated and that can't communicate with each other. And there are a bunch of there are some such tests, but uses the one-time communication boilerplate, and so and with scattered test expectation. And this is still open questions, and questions, should we better have a better framework or better support on web platform test side for supporting those kind of top-level navigation tests, or do we need the new BFCache test-only APIs for better ergonomics and so on? And anyway, still our implementation is in early stage, and we are welcoming the reviews and suggestions. Next slide. And currently we are writing a test in this fashion. First, the top-level test HTML opens the new window with no opener, which is needed to enable BFCache in Chromium. And then we navigate to another document, and the back navigate to the b.html, and then we check the test expectations, whether the b was served from BFCache, what kind of events are fired, and other expectations, and then post and communicate the result back to the a.html. In this fashion, we can centralize the most of the test logic into b.html, especially in simple scenarios. But we might need a more improvement in ergonomics and so on. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think right now is the time for questions or discussions, if anyone wants to ask any questions.
So a question that I've had around thinking about how to implement support for BFCache in new and existing web APIs is around the expectation of what should happen for external events that occur while the page is in a non-fully active state. So there are lots of things that can occur when the page is in some kind of frozen state. Things like in the case of, for example, like connections that break or connections that are reestablished, and thinking about what kind of view of the changing state of the world we should expose to those kinds of pages. Should they get kind of one big pile of updates when they're activated that kind of syncs up the behavior with where they would be if we kind of just jumped time forward? Or should we design things to sort of have to be more BFCache aware, and expect the site developer to listen for an event around resume and just kind of restart their own logic, from scratch, and query for what the current state of things is?
Who's going to take it?
Do you want to?
All right, I'll it kind of depends on the type of data that's coming in. So if it's data that is in some way sensitive or some way reveals information that the page wouldn't have had if it had been closed, then you either have to not, you can't give it to the page when it comes back. And that might mean, if that would make your entire system kind of inconsistent, that might mean you have to evict the page if some of that data arrives, right? And it would be, if that's kind of a very common scenario for the system, then it's probably a good idea to have some kind of a shutting down and starting up again interaction as you go into BFCache, so that the page doesn't get into some weird state where you've dropped events and you really shouldn't have. So there's like an example of that is geolocation, right? So, and I think you were talking about Serial. So I think Serial's maybe a weirder. You probably have to shut down Serial and start it up again when you come back, because the page should behave as if it missed everything that happened while it was in BFCache. And maybe that's not, I don't know, maybe you can leave things open and do that, but it might, that would definitely be weird if you have kind of basically two devices that expect to be having a conversation and to see the whole conversation, but we're not allowed to deliver some part of the conversation, then it would be better to cleanly shut it down and open it up again. But for example, we do for network connections, we allow them to keep going for a while. Like we have some limits on bandwidth and time and stuff like that, but the data that comes across the network is not really dependent on, it's not like if you were allowed to make that request, it doesn't really matter whether you went into BFCache or not. When we come back out, we just give you everything that came in. So it's kind of case by case, basically. But yeah.
I think that principle makes sense. You know, for things like network requests, we can just complete them. You know, if they completed while the page was idle, you know, they would have completed if the page hadn't been idle, and they would complete if the page started it, you know, after it came back.
Right.
In case of geolocation, we should stop geolocation updates. We shouldn't, you know, queue them up or anything like that. You know, in the case of Serial, like we can break, you know, as with things like, I imagine like, you know, WebSocket connections are kind of a similar case where like, you know, we want to just break the connection because it says if the page closed, like we kind of treat it as if the page closed. But then the site could, you know, open the connection again. So we should deliver the close event. I think there was one question that was kind of raised like on one of these patches, like should we deliver the close event before the page goes into goes into the cache or after the page comes out of the cache? And then like for things like, you know, device presence, you know, we can give an update that says like, here are the devices that went away, here are the devices that came in, and we can kind of elide the cases where a device kind of went away and came back, or sorry, came in and left while the page was gone, and hide those.
Yeah, for the before or after thing, the problem with delivering events, problem with delivering an event before we go into BFCache is if we tell you, hey, we closed this thing, you then have an opportunity to open it again. And so for wake locks, at least, the way it works, and it seems to work fine, is to deliver the close event as basically the first thing you get when you come back. So, yeah.
I think Dominic raised his hand, and I think he pointed out something similar during the tag creation, doc creation.
Yeah, no, I just now I'm processing the thing you mentioned about wake lock, because I have a similar case. I'm working on a new navigation history API, and we're like, should we tell the page that the navigation completes after they come back to it, which means that the navigation has not only completed but been undone? And the solution we're tentatively thinking is kind of running the navigation is complete during unload. And I was wondering if that kind of generalizes, like you know, during unload, you give the WebSocket disconnect event or the wake lock shutdown event. I'm not sure. Like, do you have thoughts on that kind of thing?
Unload is not going to run at all, right?
Well, page hide. Yeah,
okay.
I mean, they're the exact same time. It's just, you know, one of them we're going to skip and one we're going to keep doing.
Yeah. I guess I don't understand the actual use case, so I don't have.
Well, I'm curious about why you would. Let's do the wake lock thing. Like, you suggest doing that after they come back. Would it also make sense to do it during unload or during page hide?
Let me try. There's a thread where we went into the details on this, and the spec said. I'll have to send you the thread where we hash this out. I've forgotten exactly why, but it makes sense. It all fits nicely with the spec, and I think it causes some problems. Basically, if you do it beforehand, if you deliver the event before, first of all, you have this danger that the reaction to the event might be to take the wake lock again, right? And then you're in this messy situation, right? But I think there was actually another reason in there to do with timings as well that made it the right way to do it. Could be misremembering that.
I think right now we also recommend web developers to clean up all their things during page hide. So I guess it kind of makes sense for APIs to also clean up their things over page hide and then update the page.
Oh yeah, I think the spec said that the wake lock is freed, and then there wasn't really. I think the wake lock might have been freed after page hide. And so now we have page hide where we're going to clean things up and make decisions about whether, after page hide, we make decisions about whether it can be cached or not. But at that point, it still hasn't released the wake lock, right? So.
Yeah, especially if cleaning up requires going to the browser process, page hide is this very synchronous moment in time. That's interesting. All right, look, send me that thread if you can find it.
Yeah, well, I don't have internet where I'm in it. Well, I'm in a car at the moment, so it's not convenient.
Daniel raised his hand.
Okay. And before that, Thomas question on the.
All right. So many channels.
I'll defer to Tom because I think he was before me.
Yeah, sure. Real quick, I was just wondering, how does BFCache play with service workers? We're talking about this, it's difficult to synchronize state to some page as it's going in or coming out of the cache because things are happening in the real world. If the page registers a service worker, and that's kind of understood to be a background processing, lives in its own, context, is that maybe a way we could offer pages to have this trusted sandbox? Because I don't know. That's just my. It seems like a thing that might have been an exception to the rule of this, never deliver anything. Does that make sense?
So you're saying if you had a service worker listening for geolocation, that would be okay, for example. I don't know if they can do that. Maybe they can, but
no, they can't.
Okay.
So my take on this is that service worker can continue running, while the service workers can't reach BFCache pages since they shouldn't be running any scripts, or they should act as they are disappeared. They have disappeared. They would stay on memory, but they wouldn't do any actions on their behalf. So the service workers continue running, BFCache are completely frozen at that point.
And if the service worker tries to contact the BFCache page at any when it's BFCache, it will basically just affect the page. So there's
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'll try to fit this in 1 minute. I think I was involved a really long time ago when I worked on IndexedDB, and IndexedDB is weird because having a connection essentially holds a lock on a version, and in order to upgrade to another version, if a new page is trying to open the next version, the old page has to actively hack it and close its connection. And so because of this, I think we originally made it so that all index, if there was an IndexedDB connection, that means that the BFCache page, it wasn't eligible to be BFCached. Just interested if this was updated at all. I don't know what percentage of pages use IndexedDB that could have been BFCached, because I know the percentage of IndexedDB has been going up. And if there's a slightly better solution where you could say, we're going to let that page live, and it's going to hold a lock onto this version, and then we only evict it if a new page wants a later version, because it's only it only blocks new versions. So was that ever poked at, or maybe it was just not a high priority because maybe there weren't weren't a lot of pages that had IndexedDB connections.
There are some number. I think it's so BFCache dash is our dashboard that tells you what's blocking what percentage of navigations. It's a little bit hard to navigate if you don't know what experiment group to look for. So I can send you something later. But I think we see like 1 to 2% or something like that, or maybe even less than 1% of pages of navigations blocked by the presence of IndexedDB. It is still a blocker. And if you're interested in fixing it, that's great. We've been targeting the highest percentage blockers, the team itself, and we're kind of getting down to the point where it's like 1 and 2%, and also where the easy ones are gone. And so we'd like teams to. We haven't really done a push to try and reach out to teams and get them to fix a lot of things, but at some point we're going to be kind of asking, each team, hey, you're blocking 1% of BFCache navigations. Can you fix it? So if you're interested in getting a jump on that, that'd be great.
Great. Well, I've unfortunately moved to a different project, but maybe if I have some free time.
All right.
Okay, I think we're out of time, but yeah, please, ask your questions to the BFCache staff mailing list if you have any questions. And also, there's lots of GitHub issues on BFCache itself, so feel free to file issues if you find any too. Thank you so much.